Hi, I'm Suzanne Ehlers, and this is Not Really Strangers, the podcast where we explore just how connected the refugee experience is to our everyday lives and to the social issues that matter most to us. Thanks for joining us for another conversation with a brand new guest, here to share the story of how they came to realize that their story and the refugee story were intertwined. By the end of this episode, you'll see that in this global community, the distance between us is often much shorter than we think. Let's dive in. All right, here we are. Welcome, Kat Graham, to Not Really Strangers.
So nice to be here. I love the title of it, Not Really Strangers, because I've been trying to explain that for the 13 or 15 years I've been with UNHCR, that we're all so much more connected than we realize, and what affects you affects me and vice versa. So I really, really love the title of this podcast.
Oh, thank you. Well, we will explore the title and the notion of strangers a little bit later, but I will open up, and of course, for those who don't know you, and we'll explore the role that you've played with UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, as a Goodwill ambassador, also a famous sort of everything, a musician, an actress, a producer. I have more tabs open about what you've been up to for like the past month than I have open for anything else. Like, it's been a busy stretch for you. So I also just want our listeners to appreciate that this issue means enough to you, that you carved out time in an otherwise incredibly demanding kind of career moment to have the conversation. So thank you for that.
Oh, that's very sweet. Suzanne, UNHCR, the refugee agency, is my number one priority. And the only reason I don't spend more time doing it is because just have to, work so that I can continue to have impact and influence to help drive more people to the UN agency. So I'm grateful to be here, and it's such a joy. Such a joy.
Good. Well, let's dive right in. I'm calling in from DC, where I usually am when I record these podcasts, but I don't think our listeners know. Where are you dialing in from today?
Oh, I live in Georgia.
Is Georgia where you call home, or do you have other notions of sort of home in your life?
I'm a proud immigrant. I was born in Geneva, Switzerland. And my grandfather was a UN ambassador from Liberia to Switzerland, the Netherlands. And then I was raised in Los Angeles, actually. And I winded up doing a show from like 2009 to 2017. And that's what actually brought me to Georgia. And I really loved it here. Georgia has one of the biggest resettlements. And I really love that they are pretty open arms and welcoming in this state. And I really love, I love our mayor.
Yeah. Oh, so a couple places. I mean, Geneva, my husband is Swiss on his father's side, and of course our headquarters are there. Yeah.
Right.
So Geneva, I know well. And you mentioned Liberia, you mentioned Los Angeles, of course, which from an entertainment and kind of culture perspective, maybe people were expecting. But let's spend just a second on Atlanta. I'm not sure that all of our listeners would expect that Atlanta, Georgia is home to such an incredibly diverse community of immigrants and resettled refugees. You mentioned the mayor. What is it about Atlanta that is able to be so forward-leaning in this issue that means so much to you?
That's a great question. I mean, there's so many smaller organizations even within Georgia that are very supportive. Like, we've done stuff here with coding, like resettled refugees who want to learn how to code. There's a really cool coffee shop called Refuge that I've interviewed the owner of, that is actually run by resettled refugees. They just really find different ways to support people to thrive. There's a really beautiful school that I got a chance to hang out with and visit the kids in Decatur, where a lot of the children were from Afghanistan and had to leave and resettled. So, I mean, it's just such a beautiful place. And yeah, I don't think a lot of people know that Georgia has such a big number in terms of resettlement. And so I just love it here. I feel right at home as an immigrant myself and as a granddaughter of refugees. I feel very good. And, you know, Georgia obviously has its own history. We are in the South, right? There are, you know, every now and again you get people that have limiting beliefs, I'll say that, who maybe just don't have the education around what it means to be an IDP, what it means to be an immigrant, what it means to be resettled. But they're going to learn.
Mm-hmm.
They're learning. And I'm happy that I'm here to help teach them.
I love it. And the only way you make change is by putting people sort of proximate to those issues and those people who've had those experiences. And then you like open up a conversation that, you know, I'm from South Texas, and I will tell you for sure that many of my family don't really get their head around the work that I do. And we will talk a little bit later about the school that you mentioned, because Elizabeth Alongo, the head of school there, is a good dear friend of mine. I was so touched that you were able to go there.
So much. Yeah, I got to go back
Yeah.
and visit them and do some art projects with them and check on them. And, you know, she's great. She's great. There's so many good people in the world that are making a difference. And I think another misconception, besides all the misconceptions that people have about refugees, is also the people that work with UNHCR. Some of the most grounded, easygoing people that just want to make a difference. And I think if people saw themselves in the people that volunteer and that work for UNHCR, I think that they would, you know, look at everything differently. They just got to meet us.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've done a couple of, you know, visits to field operations now. And I mean, I always reflect on the refugees and those who've been displaced that I've met, and like the resilience and the courage and the kind of like, we'll just get it done attitude. But then the second reflection is always the staff of UNHCR, like incredible humanitarians who like day in and day out do really hard work and have positive attitudes and are always looking for solutions. I agree with you. It's an incredible workforce.
It is.
Yeah. You've started to sort of go here, but I'm going to ask maybe a little bit more directly. Can you share a little bit more about the personal experience in your life and in your family's life that led you to be such an important advocate for this issue?
So my father's side of the family, or long line of Liberian diplomats and politicians. My great uncle, William, was the president of Liberia until his assassination. And my grandfather, part of the Hartford Grahams, went against the Charles Taylor regime, which is a notoriously dark regime. And they lined up my grandfather on the beach to be shot. And he went from, you know, having this stable life and stable situation. And I think about that moment more often than maybe I should, but I think about the moment that somebody becomes a refugee, and it's literally takes a second, and nobody chooses to. And so when I think about my own family and my grandfather, when he ran and fled on the beach to save his own life, to survive, he became a refugee. And he fled, and thankfully he survived. A lot of my family did not. My cousins were running out of their own home that was set on fire, and you know, they were tossing out my, you know, little cousins out of the window just to save them as their homes were being stormed. And they fled. And a lot of my family kind of on my father's side went like this and spread all over. I still have some family in Liberia, but a lot of them are here, and now they're very successful. I have a civil rights attorney named Alfonso David who's incredible, and Masa Miata and Leonard, and we just did Family Feud 4 for UNHCR this past week. So that was cool. We played for UNHCR. But on my father's side of the family, that's where that the refugee status came from, the immigrant status from that conflict. And then on my mother's side, my grandmother was escaped the Holocaust. So, you know, it's not necessarily ever something that I thought that would be a part of my identity, to be honest. And I think another misconception about immigrants is that we're not trying to hold on to this this theory of, well, feel sorry for me because I had to fight to survive here. It's just like, yeah, it's a part of my history and I'm resilient, but it's not who I am. What happened to me doesn't define me. And so that's what's so brilliant about my family and their resilience, is that they went on to become great leaders and ambassadors and producers and you name it. So actors. So it's interesting. And I feel like when I meet different refugees, people don't want to be defined by the fact that they had to, survive a bombing or running from climate change or the shrapnel that they got injured by. People don't want to be defined by that. People just want to be seen fully and wholly as fully capable, strong humans, like we all do. And so, and it's interesting because, I've had my own journey, even though I was, raised in Los Angeles for the majority of my life. I come from a mixed background of refugees, and everyone is always like, oh, she's just had to fight so hard. And I don't even want that to be my own narrative. I am one of many people that work with UNHCR and I act a little bit,
Mm-hmm. But I mean, what I two things is just to reflect on. I don't know if you're one of the first people that I've spoken with who has a story of displacement that's so different on both sides of the family. I mean, that's really like how that intersection informs, like it's almost like double advocacy, like double resolve, like you've seen it from sort of two different and yet sort of similar angles, right? That's really powerful.
I mean, you were talking about your family in Texas. I have a family in the Middle East who don't necessarily believe everything that I believe or that I post about in support of, Antonio Gutierrez and Filippo, and I stand with obviously them because they're on the ground and they're helping people and children and women and families that are forcibly displaced. And I've gone to, toe to toe with family members that are affected in their own ways by it or staying in bomb shelters. And, there's a lot of unrest happening in the Middle East. But what people sometimes don't understand is that beyond working with UNHCR, these are things that directly affect all of us, every mission trip, every, family text, everything. I'm very affected by all of it. So, you just always want to keep your side of the street clean and stay in support of the world's most vulnerable. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've never heard that, but I like it. Keep your side of the street clean, and really this notion of humanity, and also the instant when you I have this image in my head now of your grandfather on this beach.
I know. I think I see it every day of my life. 1 second you become a refugee, I had friends in Ukraine, very famous hat makers, and I wear them for fashion weeks, and all of a sudden, they're running for their lives and are setting up shops in abandoned schools. And it's just like, I have friends that, we're in 2025. We were dealing with this in, the past few years, and people that I've met, the most people that are way more capable and way more brilliant than me, becoming refugees. I've seen it happen in real time. And then I've met people that have been, stuck in a system for 10, 20 years. I've seen a lot of it, not all of it. I still have the rest of my life, with the agency, hopefully.
Yeah.
So,
You've been, and speaking of your work with UNHCR, you've been many places. I certainly have seen, footage of your travels to Jordan, Ethiopia, South Sudan. I mean, really incredible places where real hardship and vulnerability is happening. What's like a story or two that you wish sort of at least the listeners could sort of know about the refugee experience in any one of those places or another?
I
What do
have
people
it.
like just not understand? Yeah.
I have it. So where was I? It's happened to me in every single camp that I've visited. So we get invited, into a home, and usually the home is probably like it's like a little container or a tent. And immediately I get offered coffee, and I'm gonna keep myself steady while I say this, but this concept of you've lost everything, you barely have enough, and yet you're still offering me coffee, and you don't deny it, you accept it, because giving is also a form of empowerment. Allowing somebody to give to you is a form of empowerment. And that is something that people don't understand. I think people think that refugees or immigrants, have their hand out. I never had my hand out. My mom never had her hand out. My grandpa never had his hand out. We just wanted to have the bare minimum to survive. And from that, we could thrive. I mean, I remember my first trip to Zatri before there were two camps, when it was just one, before the conflict had really exploded. And it was all they took me down the bazaar, which was all of the marketplace. And in my mind, the fact that people had set up shops and food and clothes, and that the Syrian people were so resilient and weren't waiting for anyone to give them anything, but they were going to create it. They were not going to stop living. They were not going to stop providing for their families or stop creating. And I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions that I wish more people spoke about, is the fierce resilience, that people have to get their life back on track, even though the circumstances were out of their control.
Right. Right. I mean, that the picture of that coffee ceremony, if you will, I agree with you. I feel like it's been replicated across hundreds. You walk in and you think, where on earth will you find, the small ceramic mug, the coffee? You'll go through the inconvenience of boiling the water and preparing it in what looks like a landscape of scarcity. That's like, it just proves you wrong. It's a landscape of total abundance in those homes
Yeah,
and camps.
total. I mean, my favorite, when I say like this agency is my number one of my life, like I wish I could just do mission trips and do nothing but work for the agency, and I didn't have to cover anything else in my life. I mean, when I tell you, I have sat and had meals prepared for me, and I have just been just weeping because of the generosity, and for them to have to be giving to us with nothing. And the hardest part is leaving. If anyone watching has ever gone on a mission trip, it doesn't have to have been with UNHCR, but any sort of mission trip where you've gone to a community or a country, that is trying to find their stability, they come with you. There's not a day I have in my bedroom next to my bed, I have a picture of the first young girl that I met at Zatri, and I gave her my jacket because it was so cold and she didn't have a jacket. And I have a picture of her in it next to my bed. I look at her every day of my life. And the hardest thing is that that so many people are still there and are fighting for their way forward, and that don't have the support or the resources, or the agency doesn't have enough support or the resources. And they stay with you. They walk with you. I can taste their coffee. I can hear their laughs. I can, it's frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, for the listeners who are not watching me and Kat have this conversation, just the real emotional difficulty in witnessing people in such vulnerable circumstances. And you come into this moment of connection and of abundance and of hope. And then you leave that, and you can keep up with people, and you can sort of see where people might go and land, or school that's made possible. But it's but you never fully let go of those moments together. I really appreciate what you're feeling.
I think the bravest thing that I really appreciate in my audience is to look with me, to not, turn a blind eye to what's happening, but that we tackle it, and that we tackle it from a place of love and respect, and not from anger. Because it's so easy as a global community to get very angry at certain powers that be for the unfair treatment or the exploitation of people and resources. But I always ask my call them my kids, my audience, to just, that idea that we're not strangers, and that people just have to become educated, and that we can make a difference. And also, something that people might not know about me is I actually personally, obviously I have my own link and where people can donate. That's always on my Instagram. It lives there all year round. It's evergreen. But I personally have a monthly thing. I have two different ones that I do for UNHCR that just come out of my little PayPal, my account every month, because I know that it adds up over the years. And so I just want people to use that, because you have an option to do that. And it's not oh, I'm just on here because I want to ask people for money because UNHCR is underfunded. I'm asking you guys to join me in this mission to help these kids and help people that just need to keep the hope. We don't have to fix it tomorrow, and it might not be fixed tomorrow, but for someone's life, it might be, right? That extra $5 or that extra thing might be enough for them to survive enough to continue to have the strength to move forward and to become my grandfather or to become my grandmother, give them the freaking hope. So I don't know. I'm not speaking like the ambassador, right? It's just I lose kind of all of my poise and etiquette and, when I talk about my work.
But then you just provided for me this reminder of all the doors you can walk through. There's all sorts of things to do, but just on this sort of monthly gift thing. I have two teenage daughters, and I say once a month, skip a fancy coffee drink and put $5.75 toward a charity, which at the end of the year is well over $60, which over 10 years is money that they don't think they have. Just anything to support people who are doing really good and hard work that, as you said, brings love and respect back to the equation, as opposed to getting, I think, sucked in by some of the anger and frustration, which we're up against a lot, and you can feel overwhelmed by it, or you can decide to kind of forge a path through it and make a little difference every step along the way.
Exactly. And I also realize, like, as we're kind of in a difficult point, not having the kind of funding that we expect or more importantly need, to get creative, right? So, I'll do like Family Feud or, you can make t-shirts and sell them. You could sell lemonade. We just have to stay really creative. We do podcasts, we find ways to stay creative and to keep the conversation out there. If I'm doing press for a movie, they ask me about UNHCR and I talk about that we need the support and so I think we just have to all stay creative and the world can be with us on this and I just have to keep the hope. If they can have hope, we can have hope.
We can have hope. Yeah. Yeah. And we will put in the show notes if we can, a link to your Instagram, which showed some of the Family Feud pictures, which were hilarious. I love Family Feud. I mean, when I heard one of my colleagues told me that you had done it for UNHCR, I mean, I was, again, grateful. Like creative and new approaches, totally different audience. Like you're just putting yourself, I mean, and that's sort of part of the beauty of what your career is that you are in front of so many different kinds of audiences. And I watched you use every opportunity available to you
I will.
to talk about.
I sure will.
You do.
I sure will.
Which is awesome, right?
I love it. I have no shame. Well, it's just so, you walk with them. They, you walk with the people that you've met and the women and,
Well, speaking of women, you mentioned, we talked about this earlier in the episode. So Kat, with a couple of folks from my team, visited a school called the Global Village Project. And we'll put a link to it in the show notes because it's an incredible partner. And they basically help resettled refugee girls get caught up with school once they're here in the US so that they can go on to a university education. So girls from all over, Afghanistan, South Sudan, I mean, Venezuela, like it's a real true melting pot of cultures and languages and abilities. And the head of school there, Elizabeth Alongo, I don't know if you know this, Kat, but she's stepped down. She's going on to her next career journey. And they just identified a new head of school. So I'm just going to invite all of our listeners to check out what they're up to. And when you went there and you witnessed these refugee girls in this sort of school program, what struck you about this education piece? What struck you about not having access to education, having it interrupted while you're displaced, and then trying to get caught back up so that you can use it to unlock opportunities for you? Anything in particular that really stayed with you from that school visit?
So many things. I can't wait to see them again. But one thing my first initial thought about everyone was how these are children, they're young girls, and everyone was interacting with each other. There was no, Afghanistan here, Sudan here. Everyone was like, it was a melting pot. And I was like, wow, if the world could be like these girls, that's what really stood up. One thing I've learned about children in particular, especially when I would volunteer at the Children's Hospital, you don't mention when you're hanging out with them about the trauma that they've gone through or what, they might be experiencing. You just treat them like everyone else and that everything's fine. And if they feel like sharing something with you, great. But a part of their healing is also to just feel like, wow, that's, an amazing essay you wrote, or wow, I love the way you sing that song, or did you draw that? That's incredible. And it's about honoring what they're showing up with because they need to be empowered. When you lose everything and your sense of stability as a kid, what you do have is your mind. And if you can honor that within children, they just feel so great. I also, what was interesting is that when I visited Kind of a similar setup, but specifically for Ukrainian children. We did a mission trip in Budapest last year. I don't even remember. Do so many trips, but we visited a children's school in Budapest when we were there for the Ziget Festival, and the kids. I just got to sit with them while they were learning, but it was actually the parents that had a lot of the trauma and the guilt and the worry, and the father had to stay back and work while they left, and they continued, and they had to continue on for safety. So it's usually the parents that feel it a lot. And so I think a lot of people sometimes focus on the children. The children need it. Absolutely. They need school supplies. They also need warmth. They need all of the things that UNHCR provides. But I think it's also important to understand the weight that these parents have. My friend Mary, who is now a UNHCR ambassador, she fled Sudan. I took her as my date to L'Oreal Women of Worth thing, and we were talking about. We just have these conversations about, her. She lost both of her parents and, a lot of her family, and then she went on to do school in Minneapolis and got a grant, and, but the weight of a parent, and that they also need that kind of support. Especially the men. I think so much focus is always on a lot of women and children, but men sometimes give up their education, everything that they need to take care of the family, or have to go and fight, so it's brutal.
Yeah, I think I know the Mary you're talking about, Mary Maker, who we've done a couple of things with before, and we will again put in the show notes. Her story is amazing, and I have watched her electrify a crowd at like 7:30 in the morning at a breakfast before kind of a conference began. And she walks to the stage, and you can tell some of these sort of business types are like, who is this anyways? And then she begins to lay out the journey that she's made, what the hurdles that she overcame to get to school in Minnesota, and then now the career she's building for herself. She is like a one woman wonder. Absolutely.
Yeah, we have a dream because she was teaching. She was raised in Kakuma, and so she and I have a dream about starting a little camp in Kakuma for actors and teaching together. So, one day when we get back to mission trips and stuff, that's going to be one of my next stops is Kenya. And then I'll teach acting classes and art and things like that. Expression is also really important. I think when people also, obviously there are certain things that we need that are bare minimum for people's support. I remember the first time I ignorantly, I had to go to the bathroom, and we were way out, and there was only a hole in the ground in one of the camps. And then I realized people barely have enough water to drink, let alone to wash their hands with. And so the hygiene at these camps and how sick women and men and children are getting because they don't even have enough clean water to drink, let alone to bathe. So obviously there are the bare minimum things that we need within the agency, but then what comes after that, which is so exciting as well for me, are the instruments that and balls. Sometimes a whole entire camp will maybe have 3 balls that all of these children have to play with. There's not enough. They don't have toys. They don't have things like that. They're makeshift. They're making a bunch of balls out of rubber bands. And, I think the hardest thing right now is we're just trying to get everyone to survive so that they can thrive. But also for me, as somebody who turned to art as a way to express myself, as a form of mental health and healing for my own self, I can imagine how important and necessary a music center or an extra soccer field or things like that will be to these kids.
Yeah, there's Nick, my colleague Nick Feeney, who you know from your work maybe in Atlanta and beyond. We traveled to Poland together last year, and we saw we met a Ukrainian-led NGO that was sort of doing, I didn't know what this word was, hippotherapy, which is sort of therapy through horses. And so these were kids with special needs who had been totally disconnected from their kind of communities in Ukraine. And I bring it up because it really is this like, well, that feels like a lot of extra, but it was like so grounding and so healing for these children to interact with these beautiful animals and to ride and to forget about all that was sort of swirling in their lives for sort of the moment where they went around the yard. And then what was really interesting to the second point you said is that the parent community that came around while their kids were being sort of relieved of their worries for a 30-minute or 1 hour session, that parent community was so strong because they really needed to see each other in these same positions. I mean, it was just two things that you said that kept coming to me in this sort of Polish example of a Ukrainian-led enterprise. So beautiful.
There's areas that people don't necessarily think about, right? But like there's an area in Chad where people are crossing that is like an in-between point that I was hoping to put like a healing center in where we have music and therapy and things like that. I mean, I remember, I don't think I've been to one camp where they didn't have somebody on call to help with the trauma that people experience. And so it's important for people to understand that it's not just about people fleeing for their lives, but the toll that takes on them mentally and rehabilitation back into a life after losing your stability, your safety, God knows how many family members and friends, your home, everything that you've known, that can people don't understand how strong you have to be a refugee.
Yeah, agreed. And speaking of some of those like incredible people, the only time I've had the gift of watching you perform live was last year at UNHCR's Nansen Awards. And you performed Peace Talks, and it was in honor, I guess, as sort of part of the ceremony that was giving the award to 5 remarkable women trailblazers. And I know that you interacted with them on stage, and certainly you'd met them ahead of time. Was there any like particular sort of moment from some of those interactions that stands out at you in meeting the winners and being able to perform, like you say, this creative outlet, your art, in honor of the hard work that these women had done?
Oh, well, I just remember Filippo talking about how he loves the song and he plays it all the time. And I don't get starstruck for anyone. I could meet Tom Cruise tomorrow, but every time I'm around Filippo or Antonio, and the fact that he loved the song, because he's really, a North Star for a lot of us. And he's so passionate and he's so thorough in the way he communicates about the crises and demanding the world take action and accountability. And they're both so great at that. I think that was the biggest thing, was being able to sing peace talks in front of him and show him that I'm doing my best to represent him and the agency throughout the world. And then I'm really not that emotional, except when I talk about UNHCR. I am like hard as a rock. I promise you, Suzanne, I am not this mushy. But I brought these children from the local school in Switzerland, their little choir. And I was like, do not cry. Do not look behind you. Because they were just singing, about peace and the understanding that we're trying to build a world for our children, right? And here they were just singing their little hearts out for a song that obviously is about what's happening in the Middle East. And when you look in the mirror, I hope you see me instead. Like, I hope that idea of not really strangers, that idea crosses into the Middle East territory. And so it's one of my most, I would say, I don't want to say it's a controversial song because I don't think I'm calling anyone or anything out, but in terms of asking for peace, and breaking it down in the most simplistic way, I think in the fact that I was, given the green light to perform that, and with children of every single background. But you asked about the women. I mean, you just want to just kiss. These are like holy women, right? These are women who have spent their life in service of the most vulnerable, and I particularly, there was a nun from Brazil, and she was so little and so mighty, and so grounded and so grateful, and just the twinkle in her eye of just hope. And that's one thing that I hope that we all in this world, not just you and I, but that we all have, is that twinkle of it's going to get better. And somebody asked me, they were like, you're just going to work with UNHCR forever? Like, what are you going to do when you're like 80? I said, I'm going to work with the agency until the last camp closes, until we're done, and until as long as they'll have me, as long as I, as long as I can.
I didn't know, Kat, the backstory that Filippo loves that song so much. That gives me like a new lens in watching that performance. And I agree with you. I've only been in this job for almost 3 years now, and of course had known UNHCR, but it wasn't until I came into this organization and began to interact with him on a more regular basis. And I agree with you. He is a real North Star. I mean, he has really just such deep-seated compassion for the mission. And listeners, you may hear that and you think, well, of course, you take that for granted. I mean, he's the head of UNHCR, but I'll assure you that there are heads of agencies all over the world who are connected to the mission, but not like him. I mean, it literally courses through his veins.
Yeah, I mean, he is boots on the ground when war breaks out, when there's civil unrest. He doesn't just send, staff or supporter down there. He's there. He takes risks, and he's really the kind of leader that you want to follow, you follow him. So, I really believe we're going to get through this moment in time. I really do, but I also think it's time for the people to stand up. It's not enough to count on, some person who maybe wants to just donate a bunch of, like, it's going to take the $5, the $30, the $50, the amplification. It's going to take the people to make a huge difference. And I'm not saying that, there aren't still countries that can step up and step up in a more meaningful way. I'm looking forward to the U.S. doing just that, because I know that they can, and they understand the value of global stability. But I also believe in the people.
Yeah, I do too. It takes, I mean, you said it takes both. It takes all sorts. And I will, at this organization, because we're the national partner and we do so much fundraising in the US, I'd say every couple of weeks, there's an email that comes out from our donor care team, and they'll copy some of the comments that donors make when they make a gift. And that is like manna from heaven. It is like the most beautiful reflection. Oh, yeah. Somebody, a woman from Kansas who said at church on Sunday, I was just reminded of our shared humanity. This is my small contribution to a kid in Washington State who says we learned about global displacement in my social studies class. Like, the people are out there. We need more of them, and we need them to sort of bring others along. But every time that email comes out, I kind of save it until I have like a 5 minute window in my day to just like read and to think that people not only made a gift, but then took the time to give us a few sentences of what
Sweet.
was the inspiration, behind
So
that gift.
cute.
So yeah, it's really
So cute.
beautiful.
So sweet. I love
Beautiful.
that.
Okay, Kat, I only have two more questions for you because I know you have so many demands on you, but you just brought back up the title of the podcast, Not Really Strangers. So I do want to hear from you a little bit more. What does stranger mean to you? What's like in the context of our work with refugees and shared humanity, how do you think about that word, the fact that we're not really strangers to each other?
Well, I think it's really accurate. I think people might see a stranger in a hijab, but then you guys might have this beautiful connection over food or music or anything. It's just about talking to somebody and finding that commonality and where that is. I've met so many people that I don't speak the same language of, and we're laughing over something 5 minutes later, and we don't speak the same language. And I think if people started to understand that boundaries limit you and keep really beautiful experiences away, and started to learn more about a shared world where people started to really understand that the lack of wheat in Sudan that the farmers have has been directly impacted because of the war in Ukraine, and they actually witness these kinds of trickles in real time, then it's not just some karmic idea of what goes around comes around, but an actual true understanding that what happens in one side of the world really genuinely does affect. And a lot of people are like, I don't know, the UN, I don't know. Like, I'm there, guys. I'm there. I go to these places. I see where the hard work and the energy and the resources are going. Like, I promise you, regardless of how you feel about any leader or organization, there are people that are affected by this that we need to focus on. They are our focus. That's it. They are the focus. If you want to be a fan of anyone, Filippo and Antonio are great people to be a fan of. But also, let's focus on the people that are not strangers. We just haven't met them yet.
Yeah. That story of like just sort of thinking about wheat production in Ukraine all the way to where, I mean, that is it. Like from a corner of the globe to the other corner of the globe. Like that is interconnectedness at its best. And I really, yeah, I love that notion of this not really strangers. Just how do we sort of inhabit the space of
Yeah,
shared.
embrace that understanding, not just some pie in the sky idea of, oh, I don't even know my neighbor across the street. Why do I care about, somebody in another country that's suffering? It's like, well, first of all, it could have been you. You could wake up and that can be you, by the way, because I've seen the most stable countries and the most stable communities get uprooted because of war, of climate change, of you name it. There's nothing there. It does not discriminate. Don't think that because you are living in a certain country or a certain time or have a certain abundance that you are exempt, or that, it won't affect you, because in some way it can. I just wish people understood that.
Well, this podcast today with you will go some distance towards. So we're gonna.
I
We're
hope
gonna.
so.
I hope so. We're gonna end on a.
I think it will.
I hope so. I always love, we don't know each other all that well, but you already mentioned music, and at one point you mentioned food, and I was thinking of last year, I think you were in Brazil, and I think you were cooking with Congolese refugees.
It
Yeah,
was
which is,
most delicious food, by the
I
way.
mean, okay, so this idea of breaking bread together. I mean, you were breaking bread together, and that's a way of going from being strangers to forging connection across a shared table. And so I have a dream dinner party, and I want to know what you're going to serve. And dream, meaning like, it'll be prepared in its best form. Don't worry about sourcing. If you could put on the table whatever you want to put on the table, what would it be?
Well, I'm thinking about those guests that I would have. And one thing that I ask people that I get to meet, what is your dream, right? They're like, I just want to go home. So I would give them whatever meal represents home for them. So if there was, someone from Africa, I'd, make sure it was made exactly how their mom made it, or, their father cooked it, or their daughter baked it, that would be my dream meal for them. Because food is so many people's way of coming home when they can't. And thankfully in America, we have so many delicious restaurants that bring people home. So that would be my dream meal for them.
That was beautiful. And I really have heard a lot of, interesting resettled refugees who I've spoken with in the US who, have that one dish that's like gone, it's come with them all the way. They're like, I remember how my mom made it when we lived where we lived. And then I remember how my mom somehow scrabbled it together when we were in a camp and we had like no supplies. And now I know how my mom makes it, on our table in Atlanta, Georgia.
Like food, it's like what they're holding on to of their history,
So we'll do either a really big dinner party with you where we have guests from all over and they each get that one, or we'll do a series, or I don't know, I have a whole vision for what that dream dinner party could look like. But that is a totally beautiful and abundant and generous note to end on, which should surprise no one of our listening audience, because this whole conversation, you've shown just like such humanity and courage with your feelings and how deeply you love and are committed to this mission. I just really appreciate. Again, you're so busy. I'm like all over the place with Kat Graham. Like, what is she not doing? And I just want listeners to appreciate that you took an hour out for us just to, I don't know, to put your heart on the line.
Thank you. I think I really hope that everyone that listens to this, I don't want to hope. I actually genuinely believe that everyone listening to this will support these people. And if you imagine them in your mind, I promise you they probably exist. And everywhere from Bangladesh to Ukraine to, you name it, there are people in the world that are fighting for their next meal and who are just like you and me, more capable, more brilliant, kinder, So I believe in our audience. I believe in them. So
yeah, I do too. Thank you. Thank you for that invitation, and thank you for the beautiful exchange. And until we meet again. Thanks so much for listening. Your time is valuable, and it means a lot that you've chosen to spend it here. You can find today's show notes, including how to connect with today's guest, at unrefugees.org/notreallystrangers. That's UNREFUGEES.org/notreallystrangers. While you're there, I hope you'll consider making a donation to the organization I lead, USA for UNHCR, to help us provide more support for refugees here in the US and around the world. If this episode was impactful, please take a moment to review the show and share the episode with a friend or family member. This small action will help us have a much bigger impact. Thanks so much. Don't be a stranger.